Hello. Welcome back once again to Infinite Jeff, project where I, Jeff, read the book Infinite Jest, one page at a time, one day at a time, put it up on YouTube. Blah, blah, blah. You know the drill, dog. This is page 366. Here we go. Ashtray. Two more big urns of coffee emerge from the kitchen door over by the literature table. Erdedy is probably the second biggest leg and foot joggler in present residence, after Jeffrey D. Joel Van D. Now says something very strange. After Jeffrey D. Period. Joel Van D. or VD, now says something very strange. It's a strange little moment right at the end of the raffle break. And Gately later finds it impossible to describe in his log entry for the PM shift. It is the first time he realizes that Joelle's voice, crisp and rich and oddly empty, her accent just barely southern, and with a strange, and it turns out Kentuckian lapse in the pronunciation of all apicals except S, is familiar in a faraway way that makes it both familiar and yet lets Gately be sure he's never once met her before out there. She inclines the plane of her blue-bordered veil briefly towards the floor's tile. Very bad tile, scab-colored, nauseous. Worst thing about the big room by far. Brings it back up level. Unlike Erdedy, she's standing, and in flats is nearly Gately's height. And says that she's finding it especially hard to take when these earnest, ravaged folks at the lectern say they're here but for the grace of God. Except that's not the strange thing, she says. Because when Gately nods hard and starts to interject about it was the same for, and wants to launch into a fairly standard Boston AA agnostic soothing riff about the God in the slogan being just shorthand for a totally subjective and up to you higher power, and AA being merely spiritual instead of dogmatically religious, a sort of benign anarchy of subjective spirit, Joel cuts off his interjection and says that her trouble with it is that but for the grace of God is a subjunctive, a counterfactual, she says, and can make sense only when having problems today, introducing a conditional clause like, e.g., but for the grace of God, I would have died on Molly Notkin's bathroom floor. So that an indicative transposition like, I'm here but for the grace of God is, she says, literally senseless, and regardless of whether she hears it or not, it's meaningless. And that the foamy enthusiasm with which these folks can say what in fact means nothing at all makes her want to put her head in a radar range at the thought that the substances have brought her to the sort of pass where this is the sort of language she has to have blind faith in. Gately looks at a rectangular, blue-selvaged expanse of clean linen whose gentle rises barely allude to any features below. He looks at her and has no idea whether she's serious or not, or whacked, or trying, like Dr. Geoff Day, to erect denial-type fortifications with some type of intellectualish showing off, and he doesn't know what to say in reply. He has absolutely nothing in his huge square head to identify with her with, or latch onto, or say an encouraging reply, and for an instant the Provident cafeteria seems pin-drop silent, and his own heart grips him like an infant rattling the bars of its playpen, and he feels a greasy wave of an old and almost unfamiliar panic, and for a second it seems inevitable that at some point in his life he's going to get high again and be back in the cage all over again. Because for a second, the blank white veil leveled at him seems a screen on which might well be the end of page 366. Here on Infinite Jeff. All right, trying to knock out 5 of these today, so I'm going to leave it there, and I wish you a good, good whatever. So have a good whatever.